Funding for this program is provided in part by the Minnesota Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund and the citizens of Minnesota.
A rediscovered manuscript from George A. Hormel, butter exports from Albert Lee to London, and Nakoma Volkman's take on the Sioux Uprising. It's a good show. Stay with us. On Cue is next.
From KSMQ Television in Austin, this is On Cue, connecting interesting issues and interesting people. On Cue.
Tom and James Hormel are the grandsons of George A. Hormel, founder of Hormel Foods Corporation. They discovered a manuscript of their grandfathers and worked with an editor to bring the autobiography to print. Joining me today is Holly Johnson, Executive Director with the Hormel Historic Home in Austin, which now is the grateful recipient of the proceeds of this brand new book, The Open Road. Welcome, Holly.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
A brand new book that was written in 1946?
It was started in the 30s. We know there are several versions, lots of edits done in the late 30s, early 40s, but not obviously completed officially upon George's death in 1946.
And then this was discovered.
There have been various manuscripts. There have been people that have known of its existence, but it had never been professionally edited or put into print until now.
It's very interesting read, and not just for the business side of George A., but just life. Folks, we're talking about the 1880s, 1890s, turn of the century, early part of the 1900s, and just life then and what it was like for this young man. My impression I've only been in Austin 6 years. My impression of the Hormel family and the history was that these were people from the East who came to Austin with all this success, and had already been at the top of their game. That wasn't so.
No, that couldn't be further from the reality, actually. No, not at all. Not at all.
Yeah, he came here with little.
He came here with little and very discouraged about what he had accomplished in his life at that point. He was 27 and felt he should have been a lot further along in his life. So he actually came to Austin with big dreams, but with not much confidence in himself. So it took a lot of hard work and influence from his father and from his family's background to really get him to the success he finally achieved.
Yeah, his family was a real steady rock for him. In fact, he went to Chicago first as a young man and went back. He didn't care for the life in Chicago.
No, Chicago was a very rough environment for him, for having come from his relative safety and security of his humble home in Toledo, Ohio, with a large family, born 12 children, and very secure upbringing. To go to Chicago, yeah, that was an eye-opening experience for him.
And he was just a kid. I mean,
probably 15 or so.
He had worked in meat packing. I don't know what the terminology is, but for a meat butcher, I guess.
Exactly. In Chicago, his uncle Jacob, and that was the Decker family. So it was his mother's brother, Jacob Decker. And the Deckers are known in hundreds of years of history in Germany to be master butchers. So his uncle kind of carried on that family's profession in Chicago and invited George to come work with him when George was roughly 15.
Right,
16,
15.
Yeah.
He'd been working since he was 12, and then 15 headed out to the big city of Chicago with very little personal belongings. And I remember one passage in the book about no heat in the little room he was living in, and so he found a roommate so that they could have wood in a fireplace and stay warm. I mean, really a remarkable, tough beginning.
I'm pretty sure I would not have survived.
Yeah, and the working conditions, I mean, all that stuff has drastically improved in our country, and a lot of that's, some of it for sure started, I think, by his lived experience in working in the meat industry in Chicago, where it was just terrible, and deciding to clean things up if he was going to ever run a place.
Absolutely, and I think you can even take that back to his upbringing. His mother insisted on cleanliness and doing things right, she learned it from her parents, which is also where Jacob Decker learned it. So even in the meat industry that Jacob was running in Chicago, cleanliness was key, and that's where George learned it, and it carried out and still continues throughout the company's, I believe, the company's philosophies today.
And it's not all of the book is glowing. He admits to having a big temper.
Oh yeah.
And saying you can, for his employees, as the company got bigger, it was, you can make a mistake on strategy, but if I see a scrap of meat on the floor that should be cleaned up, he really would have a problem with that.
Yeah, I think definitely that was his key focus, and he wasn't going to compromise on that point of his business. That was the point of difference for him versus other manufacturers of meat at that time. That was his main point of difference, was quality and cleanliness.
And if you study the family and run the home there, do you have a bit from the excerpt you'd like to read for us from this book?
Absolutely. I think this sets the stage for kind of George's take on life. He learned very young because he left school at such a young age. It was 1873. There was a panic, and times weren't good. So he was exposed to things at an earlier age than kids of today probably are. So he says, I was much too young in 1873 to understand the complicated causes behind this phenomenon called panic, which had suddenly disrupted the lives of so many, and which people discussed in subdued, hopeless voices, or else shouted about on street corners and in the railroad yards, raising clenched fists and calling on God to smite the rascals. Nevertheless, I was old enough to be immediately affected by its results, for it was my introduction, as it was for thousands of other teenage boys and girls that year, to the world of hard work and constant struggle for a livelihood. So he learned it early, and he took on that responsibility. He was born first as the boy, oldest boy in the family. He accepted the responsibility and learned it the hard way, how he had to contribute.
And even in Austin, when he came here, because, is this right, because he was on a sales route for another company that brought him to the Midwest. He was living in Des Moines.
Correct. But I call it a buying job. He was a hide buyer, so he was buying hides for this company out of Des Moines.
Okay.
And so once a month he would come up. He would stop in Clear Lake and in Austin. And I guess we're fortunate that he settled here versus other parts of his route. He mentioned that Austin wasn't much to look at, but he liked the people, and the people seemed to like him. And so he just found an opportunity, and it worked for him.
In the couple minutes we have remaining, also when he talked about glowingly about Austin when he first came here, was that there were 3 newspapers in town. Mm-hmm. And he kind of has a positive say about news media and newspapers as being kind of the heart of a community.
Oh, absolutely. Even back in Toledo, he recognized the power that the newspaper had in sharing the news and how they could be slanted one way or another. But I think he appreciated that media form for all different reasons.
And that it bonded, it was more of a community connector, I think, mm-hmm. that people needed to feel good about where they lived if they were going to be employees
yes.
of the highest order.
Mm-hmm.
Also, what was fun was I don't know if it was the first time he came to Austin, it's recognized in the book, but right from the beginning, the competitiveness with Albert Lee. I mean, he brought that up right away about buying horse buggies versus electric cars or something, and he said, let Albert Lee have the horse-drawn buggies.
Yeah, that is an interesting part of the book for sure.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
What other parts did you find enjoyable?
Well, he obviously, that responsibility theme, I think, really carries throughout. Responsibility to his family. He had so much respect for his father that he felt he needed to make good, to make his father proud, to show that he had learned from what his father had taught him. He had a responsibility to his community. He served as an alderman here in Austin. He was a volunteer fireman. He served in many different capacities, obviously for the betterment of the community, but also helped his company grow as well. And then his responsibility to his employees. He cared. He wanted them to have the best life possible. He knew he couldn't grow that business without those employees, so he wanted to take care of them. So I think the theme of the book, well, there's lots, but faith, family, but also responsibility, and knowing that he could build his company, but he needed others, and they should benefit also from his success, not just himself. And that's evident throughout the book.
And I think he was more comfortable, truth be told, on the floor working than in a suit and a tie.
I think that's probably accurate as well. It was, I guess I don't recall the year, but when he finally had to go into the office to oversee the large organization that had developed, yeah, he missed it. I think he missed being out there and seeing, maybe micromanaging every little aspect of
managers don't do that, micromanaging.
But obviously it led to success. So
well, he was a guy who knew about every job you could do.
Yeah.
Whatever you say about it, that is true. He did all those things, so he knew what he was talking about.
Absolutely.
Holly, thank you very much. It's delightful. The book is a great read, and you can get it at the Hormel Historic Home.
That is correct, or online on our website.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Stay with us. Greg Seams is up next with a Vision 2020 update.
Queue up your own comments for On Cue and send them to us at onq@ksmq.org.
Welcome back to On Cue. We're here on location in Austin at the Coffee House on Main, talking with leaders who are making a difference in our community. Vision 2020 began 5 years ago with a simple goal: to make Austin a better place to live, work, and play for everyone by the year 2020. Citizens submitted thousands of ideas for transforming Austin and voted on their favorites, giving us the issues and priorities our volunteers have been working on to this day. None of this would be possible without their time and effort, and with over $24 million in grants, donations, and in-kind support received for our projects so far, it's hard to argue with the results. I'm joined today by Tim Ruzek, who's been a key volunteer with our Waterways Committee over the years, and currently works as the education coordinator for the Cedar River Watershed District. So thanks for being here, Tim.
Thanks, Greg.
So why don't we start off just generally, what have been the main focus areas for the Waterways Committee, and why is that important for the community?
Sure, we've had 4 main areas of focus, water education being one of them, just building off of what the Watershed District and the Nature Center have been doing. We've also looked at enhancing our waterways, and that's been a lot of our projects of late. Also water quality, and then water recreation. So the polar plunge actually came from that committee and is taken over by a great group at Hormel Foods, and so now they own that one, but that's where it originated.
Yeah, it's a great way to get people in the water. Maybe not exactly what they had expected at first, but it's a great community event and raises money for a great cause. How about on the recreational side of things? I know there have been a lot of big projects in the works when you look at the Ramsey Mill Pond area or water access for canoers and kayakers. What's been going on there?
Sure. Well, it was great timing when Vision 2020 started. It was right around the same time that the Cedar River Watershed District got the Cedar River designated as a state water trail through the Minnesota Department of Natural Resources. So we've been kind of working together off of that, and so water recreation and waterways enhancements going hand in hand. And so right now we've got a request to the state bonding committees for through the City of Austin for $4 million for the Ramsey area. A lot of that for bike trail acquisition and construction to get out to the Ramsey Mill Pond area, our biggest water body in Mower County. And then also for the 4th Avenue Dam to make a safe portage around the dam so that all of our 25 miles of the Cedar River State Water Trail are portage free.
That's great. So have you seen growth in the amount of people that are out on the water using it for recreation of any kind?
Sure. Just not portage free, safe portage, so that it's easy to get in and out around the water. But we are seeing a great increase of people using the river, either locally or actually people coming to town purely just to paddle the Cedar River State Water Trail, or to do it in addition to the Spam Museum or something else they're doing in town, visiting family. And so the local outfitter, Cedar River Canoe and Kayak Rental Service, has been great about letting us know what kind of usage they're seeing, who's using it. And now that we have a new access site that we worked on with the City of Austin and the Minnesota DNR behind Markson Park Baseball Stadium, Austin, it's a nice designated, nice looking rock surface, clean entry and exit if you choose to get off the river there as well, that people are using quite a bit.
Yeah, that's great. We're seeing the growth in people using it, and providing more opportunities like that will hopefully only keep the growth going in the future. And it really is a local economic issue too, aside from the recreational aspect. So To wrap up, what's been going on? I know the watershed district is very concerned about water quality and flood reduction and those types of things. Can you talk about a few projects that have been going on recently there?
Right. Well, probably our biggest achievement for the Vision 2020 Waterways was getting a $3.2 million grant from the Hormel Foundation for what's called, by the Watershed District, our CIP initiative, or Capital Improvement Project. So the plan is 25 projects over 5 years, overall about $8.5 million. A lot of that state bonding funds to match the Hormel Foundation's money. And most of those projects are upland storage, so in the headwater areas of Dobbins Creek or the upper areas north of town on the Cedar River, of capturing stormwater and slowly filtering it out so that you have improved water quality and reduced flooding. And so we've completed the first one over the past year. We have several more ready to go this fall and into next spring. And so we're starting to move on that project. But once those are all complete, we hope for some great results.
Yeah, that's great. I know we'll be seeing some significant impacts. Those are big projects, and hopefully the whole community will take notice of that and how our waterways are improving over the years. So thanks for joining us, Tim. It was great talking to you.
Thanks, Greg.
Well, that's it for this edition of Vision 2020 Updates. If you'd like more information or would like to get involved, visit us at vision2020austin.com. Thanks for doing your part to create a greater Austin.
You can watch On Cue anytime by visiting the KSMQ TV website, ksmq.org.
With the decline of wheat prices in the late 1870s, farmers turned to dairying. Freeborn County's first dairy processing firm, Fountain Lake Creamery, started May 11, 1881, with milk and cream from 200 cows. The dairies eliminated the objectionable features of making butter on the farm. Profits, instead of losses, were enjoyed by both the owners and patrons. The Clarks Grove Creamery Association, which opened in 1890, was the first cooperative creamery in Freeborn County. The farmers provided the milk and cream, controlled the operations, and received dividends based on the profit of the cooperative. Creameries in Freeborn County continued to flourish. By 1896, there were 24 creameries. Butter was a major export of Freeborn County, with New York being one of its markets. In the spring of 1897, the Albert Lee Dairy Association installed new equipment for pasteurizing milk. The following year, the U.S. Agricultural Department shipped Albert Lee's butter to England, looking to establish a new market. In 1911, the state of Minnesota purchased the Albert Lee Dairy Association's plant to create an experiment station in the center of the richest dairying section of the state. According to the 1910 report of the Dairy and Food Commissioner of the state of Minnesota, Freeborn County had 28 creameries with more than 27,000 cows. More than 5 million pounds of butter were produced that year. The population of milk cows kept increasing until it reached its peak of 39,500 in 1942. Then, the number of milk cows began to slowly decline. Creameries gradually discontinued operations, and the last creamery in Freeborn County closed its doors in 1999. This story of the past was brought to you by the Freeborn County Historical Society.
We've been taking a look into our own archives here at KSMQ. Today we bring you the story of the Sioux Uprising from the perspective of the Dakota community on an old episode of Diversity Connections.
Welcome to this episode of Diversity Connections. I'm Bukata Hayes. Thank you for joining us. I'm pleased to introduce Nakoma Volkman and Robert Sanborn. They're here with us to share an understanding of Native American history. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thanks.
Yes,
Thank you.
if you could too, just for our viewers, give a little bit of a kind of synopsis of what you do today.
Sure. I'm an instructor at RCTC in Rochester, and one of the courses I teach there is Native American Studies, and that's how I happen to meet my friend Nakoma.
My name is Nakoma. That comes from my Anishinaabe Ojibwa cultural language, Nakoma. Volkman being a German last name because my father's side was all German, American. Grew up most of my life with a family from Pine Ridge Reservation in South Dakota. So culturally I'm Oglala Lakota, Dakota. Dakota being the correct term for Sioux. I've been a lecturer doing educational programs since I was in high school in the 1950s. I'm a traditional dancer and singer, writer, and primarily an artist.
As we talk about Minnesota history, how many tribes were in the territory that we know as Minnesota, and, and could you explain a little bit about the first encounters? Because I think that's all stuff that still kind of lives in the land of stereotypes, if you will.
Well, if you go back many thousands of years ago, even 40,000 years ago, our native peoples were crisscrossing the country, migrating. The ones that came through Minnesota, I mean, who knows? We're talking about Paleo Indians, very prehistoric, and then you had the woodland culture and the Mississippian, and you had the mound builders, thinking specifically in the southeast United States, coming up the Mississippi River, the Cahokia Mounds, which are near St. Louis, Missouri, across the river into Illinois. Huge settlement. Perhaps 20,000, 30,000 people lived in this one site called Cahokia Mounds. And the one mound there has a bigger base than the Egyptian pyramids. And those people eventually dispersed. Now we're talking about a society that developed probably at least 1,000 years ago, maybe 1,200 years ago. And by the time white man, the Europeans, arrived in the Western Hemisphere, that society had already dispersed and disappeared. Well, they became other tribes, other more modern tribes. Some of them came up north. It's believed that the Winnebago, also called Ho-Chunk, the Oto, the Iowa, and the Omaha might be descended from that Cahokian culture, and historically from the Mississippian culture. And they all certainly came into this area. We had the effigy mounds in northeastern Iowa, developed by the tribes. Effigy meaning that it's not just a mound, a burial mound, but it's shaped like a bird or a bear or something, you know, it's got a shape to it. And those thankfully are preserved. Most of the mounds have been just desecrated and plowed over by farmers, and the history of that gone. The more modern tribes that came into southern, especially southern, let's talk about Minnesota. The Ojibwa, also called Chippewa, also called Anishinaabe, which is our ancient term for ourselves, because I have Anishinaabe heritage, were chased west, perhaps by the white man coming to the eastern coast, by the Iroquois as well, chased west. So the Ojibwa gradually moved west. When they got to around Mackinac, St. Ignace area in Michigan, for whatever reason they split into three groups. And the Odawa.
What were those three groups?
Well, the Ottawa, the Odawa is the correct term, pretty much stayed in that upper northern Michigan area, St. Ignace, Mackinac Island area, and even up into Canada. The Potawatomi came south through Michigan, around Lake Michigan, Chicago area, and up into Wisconsin. And the Ojibwa just kept going west, west, and north. So the Chippewa or Ojibwa settled in Michigan, Wisconsin, Minnesota, North Dakota, and all throughout southern Canada. That's where they are today. In the process of them coming into Minnesota, the Dakota people were already here in Minnesota at that time. The Chippewa or Ojibwa were a huge group of people, and there was a lot of war, a lot of fighting between the Dakota and the Ojibwa or Chippewa. And the end result was that the Ojibwa or Chippewa pretty much remained north of the Minnesota River, north of the Twin Cities. Their reservations are up in northern Minnesota there. That includes Mille Lacs and White Earth and Red Lake, and you know, they're all up in that area. So the Dakota remained pretty much south of the Minnesota and Twin Cities area. And there you've got a number of reservations. We have 11 reservations in Minnesota, all either Ojibwe, Chippewa, or Dakota Sioux. Most of them in Minnesota are Mdewakanton Dakota Sioux. Mdewakanton translates as people born of the waters. That's what it translates as. And you've got the Prairie Island Reservation near Red Wing, Minnesota. Those are Mdewakanton Dakota. You've got the Shakopee ones that are near Prior Lake, south of Minneapolis. And of course, our people, a lot of them originated along up and down the Mississippi River, especially in Red Wing and Winona and Wabasha and so on, that general area. And they have a return of the people, a homecoming they call it, in June in Winona. And then you've got other tribes along the Mississippi River or the Minnesota River. And that kind of leads into the Dakota War, but I would like to mention that Sibley was the principal general, or the one in charge of the military forces against the Sioux in 1862.
That's it for us here at On Cue. I'm Eric Olson. See you next time on Cue.
On Cue is a production of KSMQ Television in Austin, nonprofit public television.